Come, let us meditate like a Jedi. This morning, let us explore the 14th of 28 passages of the meditation classic, Great Garuda in Flight, which was written many centuries ago by the great Buddhist reformer Prahe Vajra. So, Jampa, out of the corner of my eye, I see you wrote something, and I'll explore that. I'll explore right now. It might have a bearing on this morning's lesson. So, quick like a bunny, I'm going to tap button 8. Good morning, Jampa. Jampa wrote, I have a question. Which is the solution if I can stay in the monastery or in a Buddhist organization because I can't stay with my parents anymore? Okay, that's an excellent question. The first follow-up question is, how old are you? And while Jampa's responding to that, we'll begin with this morning's lesson. Unmoving, there is nothing to be found within pristine awareness. It is not an object that one can pull or push. Selfless compassion is not a state that one can enter into or that can emerge. It is ever present without arising and without the illusions of otherness. I love this passage. So, unmoving, there is nothing to be found within pristine awareness. Well, awareness is a fancy term for mindfulness. Pristine is a metaphor describing the fleeting experience of meditation. So I'm going to take a moment to review mindfulness and meditation in greater detail so that the remainder of this passage will make more sense. Okay, but first I'm going to return my attention to Jampa. Jampa's 33 years old. Jampa, in which country do you reside? So, I'm going to do my best to push the right buttons in the right sequence. Let's review the essence of mindfulness and meditation. It could be argued that there are warring circuits in our brain. The circuit that that strives to advise us from fear, and the circuit that strives to advise us or guide us from love. Now, being guided by fear and love is different than feeling fear or love. Feeling fear or love is just an emotion, and it's fleeting, it's here, and then it's gone. That's different than using fear as our North Star or using love as a North Star. So the last thing we want to do is repress what we feel. But there's a difference between being honest what we feel and being a slave to what we feel. When I was a little boy, I was in an amusement park and I couldn't swim, and I was on a log flume ride, and I let my fear get the better part of me, and they kicked me off the ride. As an adult, I can feel fear without it affecting my choices or utterances or deeds. I suspect the same holds true for you to one degree or another. Sturgeon's law reminds us that 90% of everything sucks. That 90% of the people, including 90% of meditation teachers, are so guided by fear that they feel that being rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel is the right way to go. These are the people who will advise us to actively focus and actively analyze characteristically, doing it for 20, 40, 60 minutes a session for 2 to 4 sessions a day. That's a lot of time burning out, exhausting, depleting our prefrontal cortex. Doing so results in us involuntarily presenting with symptoms of depression, as well as triggering our amygdala, the seat of cowardice, crankiness, competition, and cruelty. Fortunately, neither the amygdala nor the prefrontal cortex constitute the entirety of our central nervous system. Case in point, our spinal cord. Its fancy term is our autonomic nervous system, or perhaps the nexus of our autonomic nervous system. Every time we inhale, whether we know it or not, we are wired to automatically access the middle bit of our spinal cord, described as our sympathetic nervous system, which has evolved to help us to notice in a very special way. To notice vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and fleetingly. To notice mind's antics of seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, smelling, and the like, including the full spectrum of human emotions, intentions, cognitions, recollections, and imaginings. So we are to notice what goes on vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and fleetingly, instead of picking and choosing between the external or the internal, the physical or the mental, the pleasurable or the painful, the interesting or the boring, the glorious or the grotesque. Now, we talked about awareness, and that pretty much did a good job of explaining awareness. But what do we do with that which we notice? Every time we exhale, whether we know it or not, we are wired to automatically access the end bits of our spinal cord, like bookends on a shelf. This is known as our parasympathetic nervous system, and it has evolved to help us physically relax and mentally release to such a degree that which we noticed during our previous inhalation could fleetingly feel less stressful, less permanent, and less defining. Well, now we know what to do with that which we notice. Fabulous. But that brings us back to the tricky metaphor of equating meditation with pristine. How does that work? Well, allow me to back up for a moment and remind you that all complex life forms on this planet have evolved to think symbolically. Therefore, in every human civilization, we see the widespread use of figures of speech. We even see figures of speech specifically describing the experience of meditation. Bit of review. As we relax into our exhalation, whatever we noticed during our previous inhalation could fleetingly feel as non-graspable as a vast, empty void. Now, when we see the word as used, we know this is a simile. So we've converted a metaphor into a simile. That's like putting training wheels on a child's bicycle. A simile is only as effective as it is relatable. Therefore, we have to ask the question, what? What is a real-world example of a non-graspable, vast, empty void? How about the illusion, the infinite azure sky, on a bright and beautiful cloudless morn, which although could look tantalizing to the eye, feels non-graspable to the hand. And so there you have it. Our experience of emptiness, experience of vastness, experience of voidness, or experience of purity, or experience of the pristine, is a metaphoric way of expressing the fleeting experience latent within every exhalation. Now, there are people who say, noticing is bad, letting go is good. Therefore, strive to be so drunk off of emptiness that you can't even safely cross the street or tell the difference between a chocolate bar and doggy doo. Ain't that sweet? But it's wrong. The great South Indian Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna reminded us that there is the conventional and the ultimate. That which we experience during our inhalation and that which we experience during our exhalation. That which we experience by silently and mentally reciting the verb watch each time we feel our chest swell with breath. And the experience of meditation effortlessly accessed by silently and mentally reciting the verb rest each time we feel our chest gently and subtly sink during exhalation. Just as a bird cannot take to the skies with only one wing, we cannot become healthy, well-adjusted adults, no less master the Buddha's path, only practicing mindfulness or only practicing meditation. We have a choice. We can continue actively competing against our autonomic nervous system by actively focusing and actively analyzing. Or we can vulnerably and passively cooperate with the autonomic nervous system that the ancients described as our Buddha nature. Now that we've got a good beat on this, let's return to this morning's opening text. Unmoving, there is nothing to be found. As we relax into our exhalation, whatever movement we might have noticed during our previous inhalation can fleetingly feel unmoving. As we relax into our exhalation, whatever something we might have noticed during our previous inhalation can fleetingly feel like nothing. We have evolved to move heaven and earth to procreate. That's all biologists agree that is the decisive factor for evolution. If an organism does not procreate, then it does not pass on its genes. It's as simple as that. So we are driven by our primary urges to procreate and to do things that make procreation possible. You know, drinking when we're thirsty, eating when we're hungry, resting when we're tired, and the like. These are powerful drives. It's not our job to pretend they don't exist. It's not our job to repress them or become slaves to them. But we have to recognize them as the formidable forces that they are so that we can appropriately work with them. The two fundamental drives of survival, or pulling and pushing, or desiring and dreading, or hoping and fearing, and the like. But whatever object, whatever tantalizing, as we relax into our exhalation, whatever tantalizing object or phenomena we noticed or imagined or remembered during our previous inhalation can fleetingly feel less graspable, less tantalizing, less permanent, less defining. As a disabled Lama, I have the very good fortune to have a tantric partner. And when you read when you go through Tulku Thondop's book, Masters of Meditation and Miracle, the life stories of many great lamas, we see that often the disabled ones would have a tantric partner who would deal with the mundane banalities of their life. You know, keeping them fat. And there was a time when I had no partner, I had no medical advocate because of unmet physical needs, unmet medical needs. I was metaphorically circling the drain, and it was very, very difficult. And in social situations, I was kind of defined by my lack of a partner. They called me single, they called me a bachelor, whatever. It's very easy for us to be defined, but being defined can be a little bit like a prison cell. It can do some harm. And it's not our job to actively try to deconstruct that which defines us. It's enough to merely notice these defining features and release them even fleetingly, even fractionally, automatically and effortlessly during our exhalation. The quest for enlightenment, contrary to the ravings of the fools, is not getting rid of that which defines us. What then? What is the quest of enlightenment? It is simply mastering the Buddha's Eightfold Path, getting so good at the Eightfold Path that we practice it spontaneously, habitually, easily, and effectively. The great irony, the reason the Buddha taught that the path could be mastered in as little as 7 days is that all we need do is authentically practice mindfulness and meditation. Doing this causes us to spontaneously experience kind intention, kind communication, kind conduct, and kind commerce. We cannot help but notice change. We cannot help but our choices, utterances, and deeds cannot help but flow from love's effortless effort of centered spontaneity. All this is the gift of using the metaphoric magic keys of awareness and release, watching and resting, in cooperation with our autonomic nervous system. Wrong button. Okay, here we go. Let us continue. And now we discuss love. Selfless compassion is not a state that one can enter into or that can emerge. It is ever present without arising and without the illusions of otherliness. Before I began my 30-plus year full-time career as a student of Buddhism, I spent time studying hypnosis, neuroassociative conditioning, and neurolinguistic programming. And I was taught to think that love was just a state that we can enter into or enter out of, like putting a sweater on or taking a sweater off. However, as my studies progressed over the decades, I came across a teaching by the late Tulku Thondop of Tibet's Nyingma sect, and he insisted that the highest love is the spontaneous and uncontrived byproduct of mindfulness and meditation. Let's return to the visual aids. The more we cooperate with our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, the more we not only calm our cowardly, cranky, and competitive amygdala, but we gently stimulate our anterior cingulate gyrus, which functions as the hub of our mirror neurons, the seat of empathy, the root of compassion and contentment and cooperation. Yes, indulging our primal drives can give us pleasure, acute and short-lasting. It has to be short-lasting. If the pleasure we got of drinking a cold glass of water on a hot day fulfilled our desire, we would never drink water again and we would die within a week of dehydration. Big fat bummer. So it's a good thing that the pleasure we get from cozying up to a fire when it's cold, from resting when we're tired, from making love when we have the opportunity. If those things were fulfilling, we would never do them more than once. And that would be counterproductive for evolution. Evolution's all about procreation and the things that support it. Therefore, they have to be acute, short-lived pleasures. And those can be fun. It's fun to hear a cat purr. It's fun to hear the sound a dog makes when its ears flap as it shakes its head. I love that sound. It's fun to see a sunset or a sunrise. It's gorgeous. But you never see one and say, well, that's enough. I never need to see another one again. No, you want to see the next one in a day or so. Or in 12 hours or so. That's how we're wired. It's not a failing. It's just a feature of a very primitive part of our brain. However, as the years and the decades creep by, we might have shelter, food, clothing, companions, and lovers. We might. But we will hunger for something a longer lasting pleasure. We will hunger for fulfillment. And fulfillment only comes from kindness, contentment, and cooperation. Our secondary reward system uses oxytocin to reward us for cooperative behaviors. I don't know about you, but I was a star-spangled idiot, and I sincerely believed I could force my mind and force my heart to notice and let go and understand and love. And I was incorrect. All I could do was exhaust my brain and become more and more cranky and anxious. I'm so grateful that numerous teachers, that Lama Chodrag, that Baka Tugu, that even a Theravada monk pulled me aside numerous times in the early part of my career and reminded me that you can't force your way into true, sustainable serenity or love. It has to be a fringe benefit, a byproduct of simply cooperating with our autonomic nervous system. Having completed our opening lesson, I'm going to address Jampa for a moment. Jampa, I don't know about your physical health or your vocational situation. I don't know if you're gainfully employed or if you're healthy. But I do know that the majority of Buddhist monasteries are run by people who are described as the 90%, people who are guided by being rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel. And these people typically will not allow someone to live at their monastery unless ordained, unless they have their parents' permission. These people often are very cranky and controlling. So my question to you is, would your parents give their permission for you to live at a monastery? Now, having taken baby steps towards answering a very good question, and having completed our opening lesson, let's now shift gears. It is Rey Skywalker Sunday morning. Come, let us meditate like a Jedi. After about 30 seconds of housekeeping, this is the Dzogchen Sunday Lama Jigme Gyatso of the Buddha Joy Meditation School. I apologize. I've made some modifications to my image capture. It's not as sharp as I'd like. Hopefully, by this evening or tomorrow, it'll be much sharper. For more than 30 years, I have harnessed my autistic special interests as well as my ADHD hyperfocus to spend about 8 hours a day, almost every day, studying, practicing, mastering, and reverse engineering the teachings and techniques of each school of meditation so that I can become your personal, nerdy, neurodivergent guide to nirvana. Welcome, my friends, to Meditate Like a Jedi, which is made possible due to the generosity of viewers just like you. For the remainder of this morning's live stream, let us sit together watching and resting in harmony with our inhalation and our exhalation. If you, like me, are prone to arthritis, I would encourage you to gently adjust your legs every 15 minutes or so. So before we start meditating, let's take another look at Jampa's very good-hearted questions. Yes, my parents give me permission, but if I can't live in a monastery because they are cranky, also, I can't live forever with my parents. All right, so, are you, number one, are you able-bodied? And number two, are you employed? The reason I ask is that 90% of those who run monasteries take a dim view towards disabled folks such as myself. I had an abbot to say, "Yeah, we don't like disabled people," which horrified me. I was just shocked to see someone say that in this country, in this age. So while I'm waiting for an answer from Jumpa, let's meditate. Jumpa explains, "I'm not employed and I have some health problems, but not particularly heavy." Okay, so when I found myself in a crisis, Bakatuku explained to me that it doesn't matter whether the monastery is Theravada, Mahayana, or Vajrayana, or I should say Tantrayana. All that matters is that you have food, shelter, clothing, and a place to practice. As a disabled fellow, I had a very difficult time living in monasteries. Let us take a moment to review the visual aids. Buddhism can be thought of, or placed, all the Buddhist teachers and all the Buddha's teachings can be plopped down into two categories: institutional Buddhism and proto-Buddhism. Institutional Buddhism talks about a very long, gradual path that is so long it can't be completed in one lifetime, in the lifetime of one person, no less the lifetime of one universe. Then you have proto-Buddhism that says, dude, you can master this path in as little as 7 days. It didn't take very long for Buddhism to fall into institutional Buddhism. And we read that some of the great spiritual luminaries did not live in monasteries or did not stay in monasteries. They lived by themselves or with a tantric partner or with a teacher, a mentor. When we read the we read of the 84 Mahasiddhas of India and Tibet. That is a story we see over and over and over again. Now, there's always going to be fools who romanticize a homeless existence. That can be very difficult, especially if you're less than able-bodied. I live in a silly country where homelessness is a crime, where people are arrested for being homelessness. There is a prison specifically for homeless people constructed in Utah. Some people can thrive in a prison or a homeless shelter. Many people cannot. And so my advice to you is going to be frustrating. As we sit in meditation, let us not hide from our unmet needs and our very understandable desire to have those needs met. We evolved to desire safety, pleasure, praise, and fame. We evolved to dread, peril, pain, scorn, and shame. As we sit in mindfulness, let us be vulnerable to whatever so-called painful emotion or painful circumstance that cartwheels across the stage of our mind. Noticing whatever comes up, whether it's a dread or a desire, and then relaxing in harmony with their exhalation, paves the path for our choices, utterances, and deeds to flow in a way that can better get those needs met. I sincerely wish I had the material resources to help you out. I don't. I only have the material resources to teach online 1 to 3 times a day, sometimes 5 times a day, and to make learning materials available for free download. I apologize that I don't have the ability to house, clothe, and feed you. I sincerely wish I did. At this moment in time, that's the best I can do. And that's scary and that's frustrating. Whatever you feel about it, that's understandable. But bring what you feel into the path of awareness and release, of watching the play of mind and relaxing into its non-graspable nature. And you will be surprised how things, unexpected things you might not have been able to imagine, could take place. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that I always get what I want, when I want it, for as long as I want it. But I will tell you, against all odds, this very disabled person has received food, shelter, clothing, companionship, and amazing spiritual opportunities. One of my Tibetan teachers told a tale. I'd like to share it with you. There was a teacher whose name I forgot, who when escaping Tibet took a wrong turn. And instead of winding up in India, he wound up in a country whose language he did not know. And he was very sad, and he was very tired. And so he just made peace with the idea that he most likely would starve to death and die. So he found an abandoned hunter's shack, and there he sat, practicing. And eventually some hunters returned to the shack, and he did not speak their language, and they did not speak his, but from the way he was dressed, and from his demeanor, and from his behavior, they concluded that he was a holy man. And so when they left the hunter's hut, hunter's shack, and returned to the village, they told people, there's a holy man in our shack. And there was a prominent woman in that town who was a polyglot. She spoke many languages, or at least more than one. And she followed their directions so she could find their shack. And the Lama was meditating, and he got an intuitive hit. So he stood up and he walked out the door and encountered this older woman walking up the path towards him. And he was delighted to discover that she could speak his dialect of Tibetan, because there are many dialects in Tibet. And he just intuitively asked her, did you have a nightmare last night? And she said, yes. And she told him about it. And he gave her some advice. And she was so relieved that she returned to town and told all her pals. And so this man, who thought he was going to die of starvation, before he knew it, had students and patrons, and he was able to spend the rest of his life not only studying and practicing, but teaching and counseling. And he lived to a ripe old age. That's a lovely story. Do I know it's true? No, I don't. There was a point in my life when I was taking advice from members of institutional Buddhism who told me to charge fees for teaching and for healing and for counseling. And I did, until I couldn't do it anymore, until it just felt dirty. It felt heavy. It felt greasy. And I just realized I would rather perish than be a competitive, exploitive capitalist. I'd rather just be defined by cooperation, simply using whatever talents I have for the benefit of others, and setting space for the others to do likewise with me. More than a century ago, a wise philosopher said, to each as their need, from each as their ability. And I'd rather live by cooperation than competition. Jumpa, I hope that helps. Let's meditate. Jumpa, allow me to elaborate. I once lived at a monastery, and there were two people who behaved like monsters disguised as monks. One always found fault and was scolding me for imagined offenses, never being curious, never trying to be a friend, just an angry little man who made himself feel good by making others feel bad. And there was another fellow who was just, you know, when he would perceive or hear someone sharing a vulnerability, he would immediately exploit it. He took delight in shipwrecking others' spiritual practice. And there was a nun who took delight in denying people the benefit of the doubt, just thinking the worst of them, lavishing them with railing accusations. That's exhausting. The third enlightenment factor is energy. When we are with people who drain our energy, it undermines our ability to sit. It undermines our ability to practice the heavy lifting of cooperating with our autonomic nervous system. So if you feel that you need to find a better place, or you need to be open for a better place to present yourself, that is not a spiritual failing. That is merely the next phase of your spiritual adventure. Let's continue. That's it, the next leg of your spiritual journey. The tantric lineage teacher who speaks to me the loudest is Prahe Vajra, known in Tibet as Garab Dorje. The tragedy of Prahe Vajra was that although he penned 5 amazing treatises, his students either twisted his teachings or just contradicted his teachings. He taught against Gondro, against Mahayoga, and against Anuyoga, teaching only Ati Yoga, only awareness and release. And yet, his students insisted on teaching Gondro, Mahayoga, and Anuyoga. They're teaching preliminary practices and complicated paths and rituals and visualizations and invocations and energy work, despite the fact he taught against that. And over the centuries, numerous people, often with good intentions, spun wild tales of fancy, justifying, minimizing, and rationalizing their course of action. Eventually saying, oh, yes, after he was dead, he contradicted his teachings and taught us this instead. Yeah, I know a guy who will sell you a bridge. The race is not always to the swiftest, nor the battle to the strongest. Time and chance happen to all. And yet, there's always, oddly enough, the most effective teachings, despite opposition, find a way to persist and prevail. Like water seeking a crack with which it might flow, through which it might flow, the most effective teachings, though ignored by the multitudes, find a way. Carl Gustav Jung, when speaking of the collective unconscious, said, when an idea whose time has come, it will find a spigot, it will find a conduit, whether or not the conduit wants to participate. I take comfort in that. The part of me that's frightened, the part of me that's controlling, always wants a clear path ahead. The part of me that's an adult knows you can't always get what you want. I've known people who were experts at making things just so, and they were miserable. And I found people who could make peace with uncertainty, and they were quite happy. A wonderful tale about that is The Hobbit of all books. There's a point when he's in a dark woods, and because of the landscape and the trees, he thought his journey was infinite when he was actually almost at its end. Let's meditate. You have taken your first step into a much larger world. If you feel that I have earned it, you could give this live stream a thumbs up. You could even help support this channel. In approximately 11 or so hours, I would very much like to return to lead today's evening meditation class and group practice. And if you are as geeky as me, may the Force be with you always.